everybody to the first seminar of this year for the National Centre for Research on Europe's Friday seminar series. I think we're getting it off to an excellent start, and we're all very much looking forward to today's speaker, who's Her Excellency Nina Obermaier. She has, for those students of you, I think you'll be interested to hear this, she has an MA in European Studies from the College of Europe in Poland, an MA in Political Science and History from the University of Hanover, University of Sussex. She speaks English, German, French and Dutch, which I was very impressed about. She started off her career, I believe, in journalism, and since then has moved through various roles within the European Commission. And most recently, she was the advisor to the Deputy Chief Negotiator for the UK's withdrawal from the European Union and lead negotiator for issues related to Ireland and Northern Ireland. And today she is going to speak about New Zealand-EU relationship in light of the new European Commission. So please join me in welcoming Nina.
Yeah, hello, and thank you very much for having me here. And yeah, I've already been introduced as speaking about EU-New Zealand relations in the context of the new Commission, but don't hesitate, please don't hesitate to ask also about what it's like to be a European civil servant and how this all works. Happy to answer all questions related to that. And I imagine you might also have an interest in talking about Brexit, so I'm happy to give you insights on the Brexit negotiations as well. And if I am speaking in a way that isn't fully comprehensible to you, don't hesitate to just put up your arm, interrupt and ask a question, because I've arrived here only 3 months ago, so I'm relatively new. I don't know precisely where you are, what your level of knowledge is of the institutions of the EU, and if I use jargon or anything else, just tell me, please. I might not notice. My arrival here, end of November, almost precisely coincided with the start of the new Commission. So as you might be aware, we've got a College of Commissioners, 27 commissioners from each member state that are the executive of the European Union. And the Commission president since 1st of December is Ursula von der Leyen, a German, the first woman ever to lead the European Commission. And in her work program, she's outlined her priorities in December, and these are now being put into action in the next 5 years, which is the period of office of the new Commission. And the number one priority, and this may sound very familiar to New Zealand ears, is the Green Deal, the European Green Deal, which is there to take climate action as quickly and as determined as possible. And climate action and climate change will, under this Commission, for the EU for the next 5 years, will be the lens through which all policy decisions and policy areas are assessed against and looked through. So we've got the European Green Deal at the center of the new Commission, and we've got 6 commissioners groups. I already said 27 commissioners split up into 6 groups, which pursue the different priorities that the new Commission has. As I said, Green Deal above everything, but there's also a Europe fit for the digital age. Also no surprise, with digitalization, there will be major changes in the way work is organized, employment conditions will look like. So preparation of Europe for the digital age, I'll say something about this maybe later. An economy that works for all. This is very important when you're looking at the European model compared to other models, for example, the American or the Chinese model. The focus very much on making sure that the economy is fair and doesn't leave anybody behind. A market economy that is based also on the welfare state. So to protect that is one of the priorities and also the subject of one of the commissioners' groups. Promoting our European way of life. Now, that is an interesting one, which generated quite a lot of controversy when the new Commission was appointed, because nobody really was certain about what does it mean, the European way of life, and how can you promote it, And what does this mean? Is this against another European, another way of life? What are the particularities? And this will be interesting to watch as this develops. If you ask me, one of the main traits of the European way of life is exactly diversity. And I think this is reflected in the way that the European Union is organized, the way its governance is organized. It's a very, very specific beast. I'm sure you're aware of the fact that this is 27 now, after the departure of the United Kingdom, 27 nation states that have taken joint commitments and that have pooled their sovereignty in a number of areas, not across the board, in order to ensure that work, life and trade across these 27 countries can work in as smooth as possible a manner. So an economy that works for all, promoting our European way of life, a stronger Europe in the world. Again, one of the priorities, very important, also called the new Geopolitical Commission, meaning that whilst Europe, as the second biggest trading bloc and economy in the world, has always been recognized as such, as a strong economic power, but not as a political superpower. Now, in the current geopolitical context, in which some major powers have decided to go it alone and to look at new ways, the European Union will need to step up and become more assertive in defending what we believe is the right way to go about international relations, notably a cooperative way, a way that is based on multilateralism and a global rules-based system. And it'll be very much at the forefront of this commission to ensure that we protect the multilateral system. And again, another priority very much shared by New Zealand. And I mean, Prime Minister Ardern's speech in front of the United Nations General Assembly was testament to that, which is a very strong defense of multilateralism. And a new push for democracy. You might also be aware that there has been a lot of this has been around for quite some time. The EU's undemocratic democratic deficit. I don't think that's true, and I'm happy to argue my case. But the feeling was still that in the current context, where you've got a rise of populism, you need to ensure that everybody is heard, that the way the European Union develops and prepares for the future is done in a way that everybody is consulted. So a decision has been taken to start a conference on the future of Europe, which is as participatory as possible. And this group, the last priority, of the European Commission will ensure that this is done in as efficient a manner as possible. So I've mentioned that, right? Geopolitical Commission, participatory democracy, the principle of one in, one out for legislative proposals, because you might be aware that's also one of the most frequent criticisms against the EU. Curved bananas, cucumbers, all of this, too much regulation coming out of the EU, what a bureaucratic monster this is. So far, somebody still has to prove what superfluous regulation has been coming out of the EU, because the way the EU operates is it doesn't just throw out legislative proposals on a whim, but these mostly come from operators directly, from operators that are facing obstacles when it comes to trading across borders. This is, by the way, also the reason for the bananas and the cucumbers in order to ensure packaging and comparability of box sizes and things like that. So what I was trying to say is the European Commission acts on the basis of proposals, suggestions or complaints from stakeholders and not on a whim. So, but that still means that from now on, every new legislative proposal will be made against one that will either be replaced or thrown out because it will no longer be considered necessary. So the idea not to have a proliferation of legislative proposals, but to focus on what is really necessary and essential and can replace an earlier version. A digital commission and in general to improve the environmental impact of the European Commission. There's also a gender balance target within the college, so the Commissioners' College and the senior management of the European Commission. There's been a lot of progress made over recent years. So I thought I'll now speak briefly about what the Green Deal is about, touch for a second on digitalization before coming to EU-New Zealand relations and the FTA. But I'm fully in your hands, and I'm happy to. I'll go quickly through that, so there's more time for questions and discussion after that. Okay. So European Green Deal. I've already mentioned that Europe's long-term #1 priority, also in our relations with New Zealand. The objective being that Europe is the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. Europe, as New Zealand, is not one of the big emitters in a global context. So all of the European member states, EU member states together emit less than 10% of greenhouse gases. That shouldn't prevent us from leading by example. That is the motivation of the European Commission to say, if we show that this can work, then others will follow. So in the context of this decision to make Europe the first climate-neutral continent, the Commission has said that the European Green Deal is our new growth strategy and will help us cut emissions while creating jobs. This will require a huge transformation, a huge transition, and therefore also a lot of money and a lot of investment, which is why the European budget over the next decade will mobilize 1 trillion euros via European money, national co-financing, private investment, and supported by the European Investment Bank, our climate bank, to create a green investment wave and leverage further investment. And there is a strong demand for this. And I think, again, there are similarities to the New Zealand policy decisions, because we believe that legal certainty is the best way to create a climate that's conducive to investment. So in December 2019, also in response to the announcement of the Green Deal, 44 of Europe's largest investors, representing 6 trillion euros of assets, called on the EU to put climate neutrality into law. So there is a strong demand also from business for that. They want that law because it gives them confidence, accountability, and reliability in order to ensure long-term investment. The decision to act now is because it's the right thing to do, because our businesses want it, and because it lets us create the rules and the framework for the future. Just transition, this means massive investment in innovation, research, and infrastructure, redirection of research funds, or refocusing on climate-friendly technology, housing, and the training of people. And investment will be required both from public sources and private investors, both at the European and at national levels. And the EU doesn't like to call this climate change or climate change politics. We call it climate action in order to emphasize the fact that it's time to act now. And it's very clear that New Zealand is one of the first partners that come into mind when talking about cooperation in the area of climate action, which is why we're talking on a regular basis when it comes, for example, to emissions trading and how we could cooperate in this, and talking about cooperation with New Zealand across the board. And when it comes to international fora, now, for example, in preparation of the next COP in Glasgow this year. Digitalization, so I'll leave it at that. Happy to take questions on that. Digitalization, just to mention that last week, 19th of February, the Commission published its digital strategy, a white book on artificial intelligence and data strategy, where again, I mentioned that when it comes to the economic model, very much based on fairness and inclusiveness and an economy that works for all. For digital, what I think is very important to emphasize is that we're talking about privacy, which is very dear to the European Union, protection of private data. And when it comes to the digital strategy, we're pursuing 3 objectives: a technology that works for people, a fair and competitive economy, and an open, democratic and sustainable society. This means that we'll be trying to create European data spaces, to have more of the cloud in Europe and not all outside of Europe, which is currently the case, and to start establishing the right regulatory framework regarding data governance, access and reuse between businesses and government and within administrations. So also this is a massive process that has been set in motion now, and we will see this year and the coming 5 years how quickly and decisively this can be implemented. I'm not going to hide that we're in a difficult phase at the moment with the EU, and I only say a few words. The UK has left, that we're now in a period of transition. We'll be where everything remains as it was until the end of the year, and we'll have time to negotiate our future partnership with the UK as of next week. But this is not the main concern. It's just that at the end of this year, this also coincides with the end of our financial perspectives. So the EU's budget for the next 7 years. The EU works on 7-year budgets, and the current one is ending at the end of this year. So we're in the very difficult process of discussing the budget for the next 7 years and how we make sure that everybody feels treated fairly, and that also those countries or regions that will be most affected by the transition that is started with the European Green Deal can be distributed as evenly as possible, and that those sectors or regions that are suffering disproportionately more than others get compensated for this. And you can imagine that is very, very difficult when you've got 27 countries around the table that have got very different ideas of how much they are likely to suffer or not, and how they should be compensated for what they get. So this is the context in which we're working in. For the Green Deal, there is the policy, big policy announcement at the start of the Commission, and now this will translate into strategies and policy initiatives over the next couple of months. So in March, for example, we'll have the new strategy from farm to fork and the new biodiversity strategy, and there will be others forthcoming over the next couple of months to give meat to the objectives, which will then be out for consultation and discussion by policymakers and notably the European Parliament. So this is what's forthcoming. What does that mean for EU-New Zealand relations? I've already touched on that. Climate change, climate action. This is what we'll talk about with New Zealand across the board. But of course, the most imminent topic at the moment is the free trade agreement. And I won't say a lot about it because you might either know or have very specific questions. Just so much unprecedented speed, 6 rounds of negotiations behind us, which means because we moved fast, we got faster to the stage where it gets tricky. So ambitious timetable also for this year, next round, end of March, and lots of expectations, lots of public debate, in particular in New Zealand, but also in Europe. And this is, so apart from climate action, my imminent priority here. And just to mention the third big headline for my 4 years here in New Zealand, that is deepening cooperation with New Zealand when it comes to the Pacific. The EU has been present in the Pacific for decades, quietly as the third largest donor to the Pacific. But New Zealand not only has the Pacific as its backyard, but considers itself as a Pacific nation and is present across all these islands, and it's part of New Zealand's DNA. So we believe we can benefit from the deep knowledge that New Zealand has on the Pacific and work together in order to promote well-being across the Pacific. And leverage also our development cooperation better in the Pacific. So this is something we'd like to deepen with New Zealand in the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you very much.